Denver Broncos cornerback Patrick Surtain II is making a strong case to be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. We'll highlight why he's playing at elite level and why he deserves to be in the conversation here on today's episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code Locked On NFL for $20 off your first purchase. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com, coming off the aftermath of the Broncos 3-2 start, a big-time victory this past Sunday against the Las Vegas Raiders. We got a lot to break down here on today's episode of the show. I want to say thanks to all the everydayers out there and the first listeners here of Locked on Broncos. Thank you for making the show exactly what it is. If you're not a follower or subscriber yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below so you never miss out on daily Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. Every single day, all year long. You can't get it anywhere else but here. And Broncos Country, here's what you can expect on today's episode of the show. Rookie running back Audric Estime is anticipated to potentially be able to come off of injured reserve this week. His window has cleared. Is he going to be ready, though? All signs point to that being a possibility. But Denver's offensive tackle depth is tested right now. It's very thin with the latest injury to Alex Palczewski. We'll highlight some options the Broncos can do this week and maybe going forward as they still wait for Mike McGlinchey to return off of injured reserve. But more importantly, we're going to plant our flag here and talk about Patrick Surtain II coming off of a 2-interception performance against the Raiders. He's been off to a terrific start on the season, and he's making a strong case for Defensive Player of the Year.
He really is, Cody. I mean, after we saw what he did against the Las Vegas Raiders, 2 interceptions, including the pick six, obviously the 100-yard pick six with Champ Bailey and Steve Foley in attendance. I mean, Steve Atwater was there. You got the greats watching you out there against the Raiders. So you know what? You might as well go make a game-changing play. And frankly, I know we talked about this in the postgame, but kind of a season-changing play. Could have been down 17-3. The Raiders were first and goal from 5 yards out when that play happened. And it changed from being potentially 17-3 Raiders to being 10-10 tie game. And the Broncos had all the momentum. So Pat Surtain really a defining moment for this early portion of the season for the Denver Broncos. And I think that a lot of times, Cody, we get to see, he shuts down these receivers on a weekly basis and he puts up these great numbers in terms of, targets or lack of targets coming his direction or shutting down these top receivers. But the people want the plays, right? They want the interceptions. They want the takeaways. That's what gets the headlines. That's what gets you the defensive MVP award in the NFL. And so, you know what? Like you said, we're planting our flag. PS2, he's now got the couple of interceptions that he needs on the stat sheet to go along with all the other great stuff that he does. I think there's no doubt about it that he deserves to be in the top 5, if not top 3 discussion for Defensive Player of the Year in the early portion of this season.
Yeah, and I feel like the NFL has to find a way at some point to change the discrepancy, I think, on these awards, right? Because predominantly we usually see Defensive Player of the Year go to linebackers or edge rushers specifically. I mean, primarily it's really gone to edge rushers. Myles Garrett last year, TJ Watt's obviously always been in that conversation. And look, I think that I like the college system where you have different awards for positions because I think that's also imperative. I think you should have a Defensive Player of the Year award, but I also think you should have a position by position yearly award that goes around the NFL. And because there's so many players that play defense at a high level that never get highlighted or recognized for. I think the last defensive back to win Defensive Player of the Year, if I'm not mistaken, was Stephon Gilmore when he was a member of the New England Patriots. It's been a while, right? But when you talk about impact, what goes into the formula for determining, okay, hey, Defensive Player of the Year? Luckily, Surtain's gotten some national recognition and some attention. I know Albert Breer has been pushing that, saying, hey, is there anybody right now around the NFL that's playing their position better than Patrick Surtain? And I think there's a strong argument. It's a very hard case to make for some other players. There are some really talented players out there right now. But let's put things into perspective here on Surtain's season so far here. According to our friends over there at Pro Football Reference, he's given up. He's been targeted 11 times this year. He's given up 8 catches for 78 yards, a 52.7 passer rating when targeted, 4 passes defensed, and 2 interceptions, including a pick six here. But I want to put that in perspective. I want to go back 8 catches, 78 yards. That amount of volume, when you consider the receivers he's gone against, you talk about DK Metcalf, George Pickens, Mike Evans, Garrett Wilson, and then on Sunday, Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers in combination. That's pretty dang good football right now. And man, I'm excited about it. He's going to face some really talented receivers as the year goes on. But I think when we look at where this Denver team is at, Sarah, I can't help but look at saying like, hey, Pat Surtain, he's become the great equalizer here. His production has certainly warranted it. After 5 weeks of the season, he absolutely should be in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year.
And these awards are really team awards, aren't they? Because if the Broncos stink, Pat's not going to get that award, unfortunately. If the Broncos are winning games, he's going to be much more likely to win that kind of award, as we've seen through the years, right? The more successful teams are the ones that obviously get the accolades. It's the ones that, I mean, the guys who pick these awards, Cody, I don't know exactly I don't know where these awards come from, if it's the Associated Press or if it's what, but the people who pick these awards, they're going to go with the players that are typically on the teams that are having a lot of success, right? You see, like, I think Robert Quinn or somebody random had like 18 sacks a year or two ago. Nobody talks about it. Why? Because the Bears stunk that year, right? So you have a player like Pat Surtain, if he's putting up numbers and posting these numbers on a team that's winning, 6, 7, maybe even 8 games, you may not get that sort of recognition. But if you can get into the playoffs, and if Pat Surtain is having this impact over the course of the season on a playoff team, I mean, your chances increase substantially. Because look, the last time the Broncos were in a position like this was, I believe, back in 2006. Champ Bailey had 10 interceptions in a season and didn't win Defensive Player of the Year. The Broncos, of course, didn't make the playoffs that year with a shocking kind of late season collapse there. But it was Jason Taylor that ended up winning the defensive MVP that season. And, largely the voting is heavily leaning towards guys that rack up sacks, guys that make impact in games like that. And unfortunately, we never saw, I don't remember Von Miller ever winning defensive MVP. Cody, maybe he did. I don't remember that ever happening.
No, just Super Bowl MVP.
Just Super Bowl MVP. So unfortunately, sometimes not even the sacks and strip sacks are enough to get the job done here. So you got to make the game-changing plays. You got to be consistent. And I think your team has to win a lot of games.
I think Vaughn was a runner-up or was in strong consideration because I think J.J. Watt won it the year that I think Vaughn had the best case to also win it. But I mean, that's why I think that, Sarah, the NFL needs to look at, okay, hey, understandably, Defensive Player of the Year is going to largely go to a player who's obviously productive but also playing on a winning team. Create like a best DB of the year award, a best safety, a best linebacker, best edge rusher. I mean, whatever it may be, like find a way to come up with an award because there are so many talented players across the league at various positions that deserve recognition. And sometimes you don't really hear about it. Like even like you mentioned, the Robert Quinn, I don't remember anyone talking about his sack production a couple of years ago, not even on the national level. I don't think anyone was even highlighting it. Like, hey, this guy, is having a breakout season, potential Defensive Player of the Year, not even brought up because of record, which I think is kind of shows a little bit of a flaw in the process because you can be a really good player putting up unreal numbers, but just be on a terrible team. It's a team game. One player can't just change the landscape of everything because there are 10 other pieces outside of that one player that could impact maybe a play being successful or unsuccessful. So maybe the NFL will one day look at that, but, I'm not getting my hopes up for that. But PS2 planting his flag early on, making a strong claim, I think, through the first 5 weeks of the season, and Broncos have a winning record. Defensive Player of the Year certainly should be in the works for him. Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts on if you think Pat should be in that conversation or not. Very strong chance, Sarah, he could be NFL Defensive Player of the Week, AFC Defensive Player of the Week as well this week. We'll keep our eyes on that here going forward here, Broncos Country. Right now, Denver's going to have to figure out how they're going to deal with their offensive tackle depth. Right now, it is thin after the latest injury to Alex Palczewski. What's the latest on his status? And could Denver have to bring in outside help in order to rectify their depth? We'll break that down much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So check out FanDuel right now for Broncos Week 6 odds. After being 2.5-point favorites against the Raiders in Week 5, Broncos are 1.5-point underdogs at home against the Chargers here in week 6. So you can check out that and so much more at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends at Hillsdale College, and time is our most precious commodity. So don't waste it by scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend your time wisely? Well, you can improve yourself, right? And Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic, and so much more. If you check out their website and explore the catalog, there's different categories within history, philosophy, literature, and so much more. So go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. It's self-paced so that you can start whenever, tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, and discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Again, go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. The Denver Broncos may once again have to make some moves at the right tackle position, as not only Mike McGlinchey out for a little bit still on injured reserve, but now Alex Palczewski, the replacement, who's played very well over the last handful of weeks, suffering a high ankle sprain in week 5, the victory against the Las Vegas Raiders. So with the win against the Raiders comes some unfortunate news and fallout that we have to cover here on Locked On Broncos. But before we talk about the right tackle position, we got to say thank you to all of you that make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. You know your boys, Cody and Sayre. We're going to be here for you all throughout the season, covering all things Denver Broncos. So hit subscribe if you haven't already, and jump over to YouTube and do the same, and let us know what's your thoughts on the right tackle position, because Cody, Mike McGlinchey, he's on IR for at least one more game here. We'll kind of see what happens after that. But Alex Palczewski suffering the high ankle sprain against the Las Vegas Raiders in week 5. We saw at one point with Garrett Bowles going down, we actually saw Frank Crum out there on the field. So, I mean, we're getting down to the bottom of the roster here. And you know, Sean Payton said it this week that there's no red shirting of these rookies, right? These guys are going to play sooner than later. I don't think that's what he envisioned for somebody like Frank Crum out there. Matt Parrott got in the game as well. Let's just break this down. Let's start with Palczewski and the potential timeline of him suffering this ankle injury.
Yeah, you know, as of the time that we're sitting down talking about this, we have yet to hear from Broncos head coach Sean Payton on his Monday press conference. That's coming up here in a little bit. I'll be on the call there, but he never usually goes into injury detail. He probably won't tell us anything about Palczewski, but after Sunday's game, NFL Network insider Tom Pelissero, who's obviously got really close ties to George Payton, had mentioned that he suffered a high ankle sprain and that x-rays came back negative, which is always a good sign, but there will be more testing done on Monday morning, which means, hey, he's going to get an MRI. Regardless, you hear the word high ankle sprain. That is something that's very tough to deal with. It's something that can linger for 2 weeks. It can linger up to maybe 4 or 5 weeks at that point. So the Broncos right now, after the MRI, will evaluate what they're going to do with Palczewski, whether or not he's going to miss time. And if he's going to miss time, how much, right? Is it a 4-week injury? If that's the case, IR could be a thing, and it could make things easier for Denver to shuffle some personnel around. But because of that, Denver's offensive tackle depth with Palczewski, potentially his status up in the air, McGlinchey on IR for yet another week. It means that Garrett Bowles starting left tackle, Matt Parrott will be the starting right tackle, and your only backup tackle option at this point is Frank Crum. So what does this mean? It means that Denver this week, I would anticipate it, Sarah, they're going to bring in players for workouts. After McGlinchey suffered his injury against the Steelers, it is worth noting a few weeks ago, the Broncos, they brought in like 3 or 4 offensive tackles, including former Bronco Cam Fleming for a workout. No player was signed. They ended up going with Palczewski at right tackle. And then obviously Frank Crum was able to get elevated a little bit in terms of being active on the game day roster for Denver. So at this point, I think if Palczewski is going to miss time, Sarah, you have to bring in and sign another tackle. The question is, who do you bring in at this point? And also, this impacts Denver's personnel decisions because Parrott was the jumbo package reporting as eligible option. It can't be Crum because now if something happens to Crum, you have no offensive tackle depth. So Denver probably going to bring in a tackle this week.
They probably are, Cody, and it's interesting that Cam Fleming was among those that was worked out by the team, so that could kind of make a little bit of sense. I know he was with the Broncos for a handful of years there, so if he's still available, that does make sense, and you likely will see one of these guys signed to the practice squad, right? Calvin Throckmorton is on the practice squad. I'm not sure how comfortable they would be having him as an option at the tackle position. I feel like he's kind of more of a guard for this Broncos team, and what we've seen from with his work with Sean Payton in the past. So you ideally will see one of these guys signed to the practice squad, get a little bit of a ramp up period. Typically these types of things, they do happen on Tuesdays when the teams, the Broncos are pretty much off on Tuesdays, right? So they'll bring in guys for workouts and things like that. And so it'll be interesting to see what they end up doing because tackle depth is being tested. Whereas remember last year, I mean, they played almost every single game last year with basically the same starting five almost on the offensive line. I think McGlinchey missed the last game of the year. So it's kind of crazy how different year to year it is in the NFL, but we are seeing that the Broncos depth is being tested at a key position. And with that, I mean, you obviously play against the Los Angeles Chargers this coming week, coming off a bye. I don't know who's going to be even playing off the edge for them, if Bosa is going to be out there. But of course, after facing Max Crosby in week 5, you face the possibility of playing against another top tier rusher in week 6 here. So you want to make sure that you have at least a couple of guys that can, bring you some comfort as a coaching staff.
Well, and the Chargers are also coming off of a bye week, which certainly helps them. That's a great benefit for them. They're a long ways from being able to say that they're coming off their bye and, at a point there. But obviously Joey Bosa has been banged up. Khalil Mack is still there, and that's obviously a little bit problematic for Denver. But the thing is you want to have this kind of identified a little bit early on. Like, what is our plan of attack? I mean, I would say Broncos country right now, if Palczewski does miss time, I think that could be the expectation here. Matt Parrott will get the start more than likely. Look, veteran option, hasn't had the greatest look in the preseason. Didn't look great necessarily, I think, in the week 1 game against the Seattle Seahawks when he got in on the jumbo package. But the hope is that maybe he can stack some performances, get a little bit more comfortable inside the system. But obviously it's not ideal because this offense is still trying to figure out their identity, right? But in terms of Mike McGlinchey, here's what I can say in terms of providing an update. Since he suffered the injury against the Steelers, I mean, we've seen him over on the team's side field, right? And that's great because it's not just like, hey, if you're not on the side field, that means that you're just getting treatment and that you're not able to go out there and be on the field and do stuff. But he's been able to be on the field to go through his rehab and his recovery plan with Bo Lowry, obviously the VP of player health and performance. So that's a promising sign. So obviously after this week's game against the Chargers, I would expect that McGlinchey will be activated off of injured reserve. But if he's not fully ready yet, right? We talk about MCL sprain, you talk about knee stuff, stability, especially for a guy who's as big as Mike McGlinchey. You don't want to rush back too soon. You want to be smart with it. And obviously the coaching staff is taking that approach. Bo Lowry will probably have the final say on things, but there could be some help on the way here with the return of McGlinchey, especially as Denver, faces the New Orleans Saints after that on Thursday Night Football. And then they face the Carolina Panthers. And then the stretch gets a little bit tougher for them. And then they're going to have their bye week. So health is very paramount right now for that offensive line group. And despite the fact that they've had these injuries, to see them grow a little bit and just take these strides has been a promising development. But you can't just bank on that, especially if you have just new guys coming in, new chemistry. You don't want to mess with that. And obviously injuries can definitely impact and throw that off. So something I think that bears monitoring here in the next couple of weeks.
It is. And you want to make sure that, hey, these last 3 weeks, you've been running the ball really well. And so whoever comes in is going to have to be able to make sure they're on assignment, that they're not going to be a liability out there. And I think we did see that, with getting a number of snaps and reps against the Raiders. Matt Parrott, I think he will be ready if he's called upon this coming week. You never want to, count your chickens before they hatch, obviously. But when you see the running game having the success that it is with the different guys rotating in on the offensive line, things are being well schemed. Guys know their assignments. Guys are prepared. And I think that's exciting from that vantage point to know that, okay, we can trust the O-line depth and we can start trusting a little bit more the running game. In each of these last 3 wins for the Denver Broncos, it's taken, one step at a time, getting better and better. So, and playing next to Quinn Miners also at the right guard position, that does help a little bit, whoever's out there at right tackle.
Yeah, so obviously a lot to watch for this week. We'll keep you posted all week long here, Locked On Broncos, when we find out the latest development on Palczewski and some other moves, including The fact that the Broncos could be activating rookie running back Audric Estime off of injured reserve, all signs point to that being the case. We'll break down what his reintroduction to the offense could look like if that happens, what to expect out of the run game, and more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. We all love going to live events, whether it's your favorite comedian, your favorite music artist, or if you want to be in the atmosphere to watch your favorite football team, the Denver Broncos, play a game. There's nothing like being in the atmosphere and being live at an event, which is what Game Time makes it easy for all of us fans to do. So what you got to do is you got to download the Game Time app, pick an upcoming live event that you're interested in. Maybe the Broncos are coming to your area soon, or maybe you're going to take a trip to the Denver area. You browse through the seats on Game Time Picks, and it's all about the great deals that you can find on there. The super deal within Game Time app makes the experience of buying tickets for your favorite events and favorite concerts, comedians, whatever it may be, so much easier. You can customize your spot. You can check out your seat view before you buy your tickets. And with Game Time, you're always getting the lowest price guaranteed with event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and so much more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time.
As we jump in the fourth quarter on today's episode of the show, we'll highlight the Broncos running back room and how they could reintroduce Audric Estime here this week. Real quick, want to say thanks once again to everyone in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen to us wherever you get your podcasts or to watch us on YouTube. Engage in the comments. We appreciate you so much. You make the show exactly what it is. We do the show for you. We love being able to talk and break down everything that's going on with this team from an objective point of view. So thank you so much, Broncos Country, for making us a big part of your day. We appreciate you. Let's get to the run game here, Sayre. Obviously, I think all signs have kind of pointed to Audric Estime making his return this week against the Los Angeles Chargers. At what depth is his role going to be? We don't necessarily know just yet, but the reason the signs have pointed to this is obviously last Friday, the Broncos placed running back Sayre Bedinger on injured reserve. There's a chance he could return this season, but they didn't make a corresponding roster move where, because they placed him on IR, they didn't bring anyone up from the practice squad to the 53-man roster. They've kind of left it blank going into Monday, which technically kind of opens up, because the window, Audric Estime could be on his way back, because, hey, now you don't have to release someone on your active roster to bring him back. You have a spot that's already available. Now you just plug and play. Estime has been on the side field. He's been working, strengthening the ankle, obviously, since suffering that high ankle sprain as well. So a good sign that maybe he could be reintroduced into the offense this week. That seemingly in the last 3 weeks, Sayre, the run game has found a way to get going at various points, right? Not for a full game, but at various moments, key moments. And that's something that the team can build off of. And with Estime, you get a big guy who's also explosive.
Absolutely. He showed that in week 1 against the Seattle Seahawks, right? I know he fumbled at the end of that one really long carry there, but the Broncos were able to recover. And so no harm, no foul on that one. But at the same time, you want to make sure ball security. I know he fumbled as well in the preseason, and so maybe just the jitters getting out early on here, but I feel like Estime is going to be a key piece of this offense. That's why the Broncos initially had him playing snaps and getting reps against the Seattle Seahawks. We've heard Sean Payton talk about how, well, it's easier to get the top 2 guys that are in your rotation involved. And when you package plays together for a specific player, you know that that guy is going to be a factor as the year goes along. So we saw specific plays back in week 1 for Estime. I think we're going to see continually just kind of that ramp back in, maybe a couple of touches in week 6 against the Chargers here. But one thing that Sean said after the game in week 5, Cody, that stood out to me is that, you know, we do ask these questions each week. Like, why didn't you stick with the run game? Why didn't you get Marvin Mims more touches? Why didn't Troy Franklin get any touches? And Sean talked about how the team needs to be better at executing on 3rd down in order to get to more of these plays, because you get to the end of a game and you're at 58 plays instead of 72. That's 14 plays from whatever package you had put together that you're missing. So I think that he makes a great point there when we talk about why is this guy not getting touches? Why is this guy not involved? And as it specifically relates to Estime here, because if the Broncos can convert on third downs and extend drives, that's where I think Estime is going to be the most effective, because if you are extending drives, you throw him out there. Nobody wants to see that dude running at him full speed as a drive is progressing along, as the defense is getting tired out. So the Broncos, their running game hitting a stride right now, couldn't be more perfect timing for Estime's return to the field.
And maybe trying to find a way to balance it too, because he even noted, Sean Payton did after the game on Sunday against the Raiders, is that, these guys had a little bit more of a heavy workload in reference to Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin. Javonte had over 100 all-purpose yards in this game. And look, he had a great yard per carry average, but he was Denver's leading receiver in terms of yards produced. Obviously, the screenplay and a couple of other things. We saw a little bit of that old school Javonte Williams lowering his shoulder through Trevon Moehrig. And look, that was a fantastic play. And he got up and he did the flex. Like, Denver got some momentum there. And then Jaleel, obviously, the diving touchdown that he had, that was a momentum boosting play. Denver's run game has, as we have talked about, has had a couple of flashes in the last, I would say, 3 weeks. You had Baday's 43-yard run, but really last week against the Jets, you had Javonte really having those chunk plays on that one scoring drive that they had. Jaleel setting some things up as well with his legs. And then this week, it was really the production from Javonte, not only in the run game, but also as a receiver out of the backfield. So now you add in another guy, which I would love to see at some point, right? Because I don't know if you remember going back against the Raiders, they did a shotgun formation, a two-back set where they had Javonte on one side, Michael Burton on the other. Why not be able to go heavy personnel, maybe have an offset guy as a wing, but then have two backs in the backfield where you have Estime and Javonte? Look, Estime hasn't played since week 1. There's probably going to be a little bit of a ramp-up period for him, but I think in short yardage situations, which Denver had not a lot yesterday. I mean, at one point, Sayre, in this game, they had a 2nd and 33, then a penalty, a 2nd and 38. When you're having these backwards plays on first down and second down, it doesn't make for a very manageable third down, which is why Denver in the first half was 1 of 6 in that game. You have to find a way to piece together some sustainability in terms of how you operate on first and second down, passing wise, run blocking, pass protection, quarterback play. Like, Denver's offense in a whole has had some inconsistency issues with that. Having an established run game and maybe getting some things going where you're not playing behind the sticks, that's the biggest key for this Broncos offense to stay out of their way. And I think that has to be the emphasis here going forward. But it's also, at the same time, I asked myself this, okay, you had a game where you needed, if you're going to go with 3 running backs, you had Blake Watson. He was not a game day inactive, but he didn't have a touch. He didn't play. So what is the role for Blake Watson staying on the active roster if he's really going to be featured behind Javonte, Jaleel, and now Audric Estime in his return? To me, I think it's just wasting a roster spot here, even though Watson is very talented.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the Broncos go with that, if they're willing to subject him to waivers and risk another team getting him, especially being that, the teams in the division right now have needs at the running back position with the Raiders. I mean, I don't know how long Zamir White's going to be out, but they might be willing to snipe him off waivers. The Chiefs, certainly, they've already taken Samaje Perine once the Broncos got rid of him. So they might be willing to do the same with all their injuries at the skill position. So it would be interesting to see what the Broncos would be willing to do there, because Blake is obviously a guy that they believe in, the long-term projection, the vision. And Sean Payton has talked about that before, that the vision for these guys sometimes is not necessarily right away in year 1. Although he also says that, there's no red shirt. So, but we did see the red shirt come off, I guess, for a game there for Watson. Like you said, though, he didn't play. Even when there was an opportunity potentially to play, to go out there for at least a couple of snaps and see what you could do. So I'd be fascinated to see, Cody, how they approach this, because Damari Mathis also is eligible to be back off IR. And he was even teasing, he posted the picture of him wearing the new helmet. I thought he was going to be activated this past week. So Damari, what's his situation and status going to be like? McGlinchey back potentially next week. There's a lot of roster gymnastics to be played. And if you have guys that are taking up spots that aren't playing, that makes the conversation all the more interesting as you begin to need guys at other positions.
The NFL should look to expand the rosters. I've always been a big believer of it. Look, 53, I get it. You're only going to have 46 active on game day, but can you at least find a way to expand that to 55, 56, just 3 extra spots at that point? Like, help teams out across the NFL. I mean, I think that there's a need for it, but That's another argument we can have for another day. We'll see if the NFL decides to look into that here. Players are fighting for a lot of things, player safety, media stuff that's going on, locker room stuff. But the bigger picture things is like, what about protection and roster designation spots? Like we've seen the elevated practice squad where you have more space on the practice squad. That's a great step. Now do that a little bit, add a few more spots to the active roster. That's our last claim here that we're going to make on today's episode show of Broncos Country. We appreciate you so much for tuning in, rocking with us here for another episode of the show. Thanks for being an everydayer and a first listener. We appreciate you so much. If you're a brand new viewer or listener of the show, make sure you subscribe or follow. If you love the conversation that we had here, we have daily content for you every single day. You can check out my written work over there, milehighsports.com. I cover the team in person on the beat. You can check out Sayre's written work daily over there at predominantlyorange.com, where he is the site expert. We bring the heat every single day here on the Locked On Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On NFL podcast to get the latest on what's going on around the league. Broncos Country, we'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.